it's happening again. I am reading the Qur'an part 2 and yeah, I always said I was going to do this in the first video, but I was especially spurred on to do it because the first video just randomly got a lot of views, and I really wanted to do an update on it and answer some of the questions that were asked in the first video. So before I start with chapter 3, and maybe 4, we'll see. Before I start with chapter 3, I just like to talk about some stuff I talked about in the first video, which I'll link below and at the end and all that. First thing was, a couple of people commented, I did use a poor choice of words in my first video because I said something along the lines of, I think more white people need to read the Quran, but obviously there's white Muslims. I did know that, and at the time I did mention that it was a bit of it wasn't the right choice of words that I wanted, and a few people did notice that in the comments, so just to clear that up. I think more sort of Westerners, secular people, people who aren't Muslim should be reading the Quran, and they should all be reading each other's holy books as well. Or even, not even read it all through all of it, just like take a look really. I think we really need to promote a sort of, I want to say religious tourism, but I feel like tourism has some negative connotations, more like religious travelling, I guess, in that sense, where we're exploring other people's religions. I think it can be really beneficial. We can really learn a lot about other people from it. So there's that. And another thing that I remember was, if you watched that last video, you remember I had a couple of questions about a part of the Quran that was, I don't remember what chapter it was, I'll link it below. Essentially it was saying something like, when men go to paradise, they will kind of get women as a reward. So I was a bit like confused about that, because obviously, first of all, I'm not reading the Quran in classical Arabic. There's probably a few things I'm missing as well. I don't know the context as well. And a couple of people recommended that if you really want the full real deal, get everything about it, speak to a priest or an imam. Is priest the right word? Muslim priest, imam? Yeah. Yeah, and a couple of people helpfully pointed out with that the women weren't actually human women, as we know. Like, women don't go to paradise to become rewards for men, which is kind of obvious thinking about it. So they said that everyone will get their own rewards. They'll get the sort of stuff that they want, and that's nice. I personally would like lots of food in mine. So if you'd like to know more about that, a lot of people have commented really helpful things underneath that video answering my questions, which is really good, especially if you had the same questions as me. I'm going to try and keep noting and saying aloud any questions I have, just in case someone else is wondering it, so we can all share and discuss it. So yeah, read the comments of my first video, just take a look through, and some people have very helpfully answered my questions. Thank you. There were a few negative comments, but what's really interesting about these negative comments is that they weren't talking about anything I said in the video at all. It seems like the comments were from people who just deliberately sought out Quran Muslim videos and just commented like not nice stuff on it. I didn't really like that, but at the same time I know that they're not really commenting on anything that's in the video. They're just like hateful people who are just like, you know, it's all bad, you know, all that sort of stuff. Interestingly, a lot of those comments were from Christians, so anyway, on with reading the Quran, chapter 3. Okay, so I don't know what chapter 3 is called. I've forgotten it. This has been a long time. Okay, so chapter 3 is called The Family of Imran. Don't know who Imran is. It's been a long time since I read chapter 2 actually, so page 34. There's so many chapters, look at that. The Surah first documents the tension that arose between the Muslims and certain of the Jews and Christians, and closes by emphasising the unity of faith and conduct between the Muslims and some of the people of the book, which from my last video is going to be Jews and Christians are other people of the book, explaining that these will have their reward from God. That's nice. I actually really love finding the similarities between this and Christianity. I just think it's so interesting. Okay, so this bit that I'm reading right now is exactly like the Bible, like almost verbatim. I'm going to cautiously say that. Yeah. He's saying to Zechariah, he's saying, you will have a child, and then he's like, how can I have a child when I am so old and my wife is barren? Like, the exact same thing happens in the Bible. He says the same thing, and it's like, oh, trust me, it will happen. And of course it does happen. But interestingly, it says, your sign, the angel told him, is that you will not communicate with anyone for 3 days except by gestures. Which is, I mean, that's great if you know sign language, but not so great otherwise. It must have been quite hard. And then the angel said to Mary, Mary, God has chosen you and made you pure. He has truly chosen you above all women. And at the top of the page it also talks about how God protected Mary from Satan as well, which again happened in the Bible. The angel said, Mary, God gives you news of a word from him whose name will be the Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, who will be held in honour in this world and the next, who will be one of those brought near to God. So that's where it diverges a bit, of course. In Christianity, this is like the most central point. It's like, Son of God. He is Son of God, but also God. But here it's saying, yeah, he is really holy. It's really great. Not Son of God. So that's quite interesting. He will speak to people in his infancy. So if you remember in my last video, we were reading about that bit where he spoke when he was a baby, which is quite cool. And then Mary's like, how can I have a son when no man has touched me? Euphemism there for and they're like, oh, he only says be and it is, which is something that has been it's like a running theme. So I've just read this bit, and this bit is definitely one of my favourite bits. It follows a lot from what I was saying about, at least, like, people may not have access to the Qur'an, the Bible, the Torah. You know, there's people in remote Amazonian tribes who don't know anything of the world outside the Amazon, who will probably never have seen the Bible, the Torah, the Qur'an, any of that. They'll never have seen any of that. It's a bit unfair to say these people are going to go to hell and suffer. As perhaps some more conservative, I don't know, Christians might tell you. But at the same time, at least in the Bible, there's a letter written by St. Paul that discusses what would have happened to people like Abraham, who will have been born before all the Christian stuff happened. And saying these, and essentially what St. Paul says is that although Abraham was born before Jesus was, he couldn't have known about Christianity, he couldn't have been a Christian, he wouldn't have gone to hell because he was still a good person. He still, worshipped God and was just doing what he could in life, And it's saying, like, and I think that's a really important thing to remember, and thing a lot of people can forget. Like, it's not all about converting people. Some people are just not going to convert, I guess. What I like to think is that as long as you're trying, as long as you're being a good person and just doing your best in life, I like to think, at least, I don't know what the common view is, but I'd like to think that you wouldn't be punished for that in the afterlife, even if you were an atheist. Interesting point of discussion there. Let me know what you think. And if you know what the common view of Jewish people or Muslims or Christians is, then talk about that as well. So it says the same thing here. It says, won't you argue about Abraham, people of the book, when the Torah and the Gospels were not revealed until after his time? It's like, do you not understand? Abraham was neither a Jew nor a Christian. He was upright and devoted to God, and the people who are closest to him are those who truly follow his ways. This prophet and true believers, God is close to true believers. So again, it hits the nail on the head, something that's also in the Bible, talking about that, saying these people would be justified after death and things. One thing I'm really interested to hear Muslim opinions on is a lot of times in the Quran it would talk about things like, just had to check, sort of disbelievers tasting fire, going to hell and things. This obviously brings up the issue and the problem of evil, that how can God be all-loving when people are going to hell and things for eternity and things. And in Christianity there's no clear answer to this either, but generally in Christianity it's about Christ and it's about living like Christ, so people tend to focus on that, and especially the God of the Old Testament doesn't get as much of a look in as following Jesus and trying to emulate his life and trying to do what Jesus would do in different situations. Now that isn't, of course, that bit isn't as much in the Quran, because the Quran isn't Christianity, it's not solely following Jesus. So I'm really interested to hear about how Muslims reconcile the problem of evil. Be really interested to hear your thoughts on that. So it does say here, God sends people to hell. Okay, what happens? Is he still all loving and all that sort of stuff? I'm not contesting it or arguing in either way. I know for myself, I studied it at A-level, how complex the problem of evil would be. For Christians, I'm a lot more familiar with the arguments for and against, how to reconcile it, but I'm not as much with Islam. So yeah. Okay, so I have finished chapter 3, which was really interesting. It talked a bit about the family of Imran, but a lot of it was talking about what the consequences for disbelievers. One thing the Quran does a lot is it will answer common arguments made against it, or common sayings at the time, and it will answer it and say, that a lot of people have said this about such and such, or they've said you should do that. Well, yes you should, or no you shouldn't, because da 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 da. So that's interesting. It talks a lot about what would happen after you died and things like that as well, especially if you're a disbeliever. Essentially, my main question is, I guess, my main takeaway question from reading this, which I'll go and have a read about now, is what is like the Islamic concept of hell? What happens in it? Is it suffering for all eternity, or is it a bit like the Catholic view of purgatory, where you're only where you're sort of being purified, sort of your sins are being forgiven, and then you're going on to paradise? Or do you stay in hell forever? If you stay in hell forever, then how does that reconcile with God being all loving? So that's my main question. It's to do with the Muslim ideas of hell. Fun. So yeah, that was really interesting. I probably won't read more for now, just because I really need to get some revision done. I haven't started yet. I've done like a few bits and notes, but not that much, so I really need to get revision done for my exams. I don't know whether I'll finish the Quran first or like dip into them interchangeably, but I am also planning to read the Torah and the Bhagavad Gita, and of course the Bible as well, and we're going to discuss those as well. So I don't want you guys to be a bit confused if I upload on me doing the Torah or the Bible or something. I don't want you to think, oh, she's given up on it, because no. And yeah, so that was chapter 3. Let me know if you've got any questions, and hopefully we'll get on to chapter 4 soon, maybe after exams now.